Okay, so now I want to talk about how muscles are named, and this is actually a very, very important concept to get, because if you're just going to straight out memorize the muscle names, it's going to probably seem very challenging. And so what's much easier to do is to try and make sense of the name, given all of the things that you've learned this semester. Okay, so you know a lot of these words, and once you think about how is this muscle named, it's going to be much easier to locate, to find these muscles, to remember what their names are, because then it's not just gibberish. One thing to know is that many of these muscle names are based off of Latin, and so we have to Latin it up, which means we're going to be putting us or is onto the end of the muscle name. So you may have remembered frontal lobe, frontal bone. Well, the muscle is going to be frontalis. So it's frontal with an is on the end of it. Okay? Frontalis. So just keep that in mind as you're learning these muscle names, that we've got to Latin it up, so we've got to put us or is onto many of the names. Now, if we look at how the muscles are named, there's a few common things we're going to see. One, a muscle may be named by where it is in the body. So frontalis, well, we know that's probably going to be right up here. Okay, that's the region of the body, and the muscle in that region has that name. It can be named on the position or the direction of the muscle fibers. So, for example, a muscle with the word transversus sounds a lot like transverse. You may think of the transverse plane, so that means the muscle fibers are going to be running that way in the transverse plane. Okay. Another thing is the nature of the muscle origin. Often that means how many attachment sites does it have. Sometimes you can actually have more than one origin, so you may have 2 attachment sites, 3 attachment sites. The shape. Does it look like a circle, a square, a trapezoid, a rhomboid? Okay. The size. Is it large? Is it small? Is it skinny? Is it fat? And the type of action. Is it abducting? Is it adducting? Is it elevating? Okay. And then a category I like to call other, that those are the ones. So what I try and do is I try and put a muscle name into one of these categories. And then some of them you're just going to have to memorize because they may not quite make sense unless you know Latin. And those I would put in the other category. But what this does is this reduces the amount of memorization you're actually having to do because the names make sense. And so now I'm going to switch to a hands-on activity that I do in my class that I think will actually help you to learn these names. Okay, so what I've done here, and you have this file on your computer in the homework section for this week, but I have large general categories. So for example, this one is the nature of the muscle origin. So this means essentially how many attachment sites does it have, and an attachment site is going to be called a head. So over here we have some of the smaller words, okay, and so for example this says biceps. In parentheses I've told you that that means 2 heads, and so that would be an example of one that we would put under the nature of the muscle origin. Okay. Now another category that we have here, this one is going to be size. So muscle names based on size. Well, for example, we have one here that says Maximus. Well, Maximus, you think maximum, you think big, large. That's one that goes under size. Okay. Just as another example, we have one here that says gracilis, and then in parentheses I've put the word slender. Okay. So that would go under size. Now my suggestion is things like Maximus, you probably already have in your head somewhere. You know that. But if you're like most of my students, gracilis is going to be new. And so this would be one that you would want to write down and make sure that you know that gracilis means slender. And so we're going to put that one under size. Okay. Now this right here says position or direction of the muscle fibers, or you could think of it as the muscle fascicles. Okay. So we already talked about one example, but here we have it. A muscle that has the name transversus. Well, that means those fibers are going to run in the transverse plane, and so we put it here. A couple of other really important ones that I'm going to point out because I want you to know them. One is going to be rectus. Rectus means straight or parallel to the midline of the body. So rectus is actually going to be running from superior to inferior. And you're going to see this word more than once in the muscles we're learning. So rectus is about the direction of the muscle fibers. On the other hand, if we have a midline of the body, oblique comes in at an angle to that midline. And so oblique is also about the direction of those muscle fibers. Now this one here says region of the body. Okay. And so what are some examples? Well, let's say that you see the name here, nasalis. All right. Well, nasalis, where do you think that is? Probably nasal is the word you think of. So nose, and absolutely that would be the region of the body. Another example is you might here we have the word carpi. Well, carpi, you're probably going to think of carpals, which means it's going to be in that wrist region where your carpal bones are, where the carpal region is. And so again, that's a region of the body. Now another category we have here is going to be type of action. So, for example, if you have a muscle and in its name is extensor, that means that's what the muscle's doing. It's extending something, extensor. So we put that as a type of action. Let's look at another one here. We have the word levator. What does that sound like? Sounds like levitate, which means to move up. It could also sound a little bit like an elevator, which also moves things up and down. And if we think elevator, we might think elevation. So a levator is actually going to be elevating something. And so that's a type of action. Okay, another one that we have is we have shape. So let's think about this. Here we've got trapezius. Well, what does trapezius sound a lot like? Probably sounds a lot like a trapezoid. And a trapezoid is a specific shape. And so we put that under shape. Over here, orbicularis. Orbicularis sounds a lot like an orb or an orbit, and in parentheses we have the word circle. Well, a circle is certainly a shape. Now I have this category other, and let me give you an example of what I would put in other. Now here's this one, sartorius, and what it means is like a tailor. Now it turns out that this is a type of action, but to me, I'm not really familiar with what tailors do. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. That would be one that I would have to memorize, sartorius. Okay? And so I would put that in the other category. And so my suggestion, I've just done a few of these, but on the file that's posted online, there are quite a number of these to sort into correct categories. And so I would suggest doing that sorting on your own, and then seeing on your own, can you make sense of these words? How do these words make sense? And then make sure you take note of certain names that are unfamiliar to you, because you're going to come in contact with them again. One resource that I would like to point you to that you have is actually in your textbook on page 340 over here. This is where I got many of the names and words that I put in those files, okay? And so I would suggest doing it on your own first, but then if you get stuck, you're not quite sure, this is a great place to go to check your work and to see, did I understand truly what these names mean, and did I categorize them properly? So one last thing that I do with my classes is I have them practice finding muscles just based on the name. And so let's start with a couple. So occipitalis. Well, where would you expect to find that? Probably near the occipital bone, near the occipital lobe of the brain, in the occipital region, which is going to be that back part of the head. And so very easily I can look on a slide. I probably don't even have to look for the labels, and I can say, this is the occipital region, so this must be the occipitalis muscle. And in fact, there's the occipitalis. You could do the same with the frontalis. The frontalis must be in that frontal region, and sure enough, there's a muscle right there. That's probably the name of it. Another example. So we've done occipitalis, frontalis. Let's look at this one, orbicularis oculi. Okay, so we have this word orbicularis. We know that means circle. And then oculi, we think of the word ocular, so you may think glasses. Okay, well that probably tells me it's a circular muscle around the eye, or near the eye. And so again, we look on this image, and we don't even have to look at the labels. Look at this. Here's a circular one going around the eye. Okay? And so that one is the orbicularis oculi. Now, let's say instead we've done these. What if I say orbicularis oris? Well, what does oris mean? Oris, you might think of the word, it's very close to oral. You might think oral hygiene. Well, again, we grow right here. And, there's a circular one that goes right around the mouth. And that, in fact, is the orbicularis oris. Okay? Let's look at a couple of others. And I want you to try this on your own. So nasalis, where do you think that would be? Look on an image and see if just based on the name, you can determine where the nasalis muscle is. Zygomaticus major, what do you think it has to be attached to? That zygomatic bone. So look at some pictures and see, are there ones that are clearly attached to that zygomatic bone? This one, sternocleidomastoid. Well, sterno means sternum, cleido means clavicle, and mastoid, you probably think of that mastoid process. And so what you're going to be looking for is you're going to be looking for a muscle, and here we see it right here, that, hey, here's one that's attached to the sternum, the clavicle, and the mastoid process back there. So this right here is sternocleidomastoid. A couple of others to try. Subscapularis. Hopefully you've thought of a bone surface feature, the subscapular fossa. Infraspinatus. Hopefully you've thought of the infraspinous fossa on the scapula. Rectus abdominis. Rectus means straight, parallel to the midline. Abdominis, going to be in the abdominal region. And so if we move down here, wow, what muscle looks like it's parallel to the midline, goes straight down, and is in the abdominal region? It must be this one right here. Okay, and so all of these. Look for ones that brachioradialis, it starts in the brachial region and then is going to contact the radius somewhere. Okay? Tibialis anterior. Well, it's probably near the tibia on the anterior side of the body. Calcaneal tendon. It's going to be a tendon attached to the calcaneus. And so this is how I want you to think about these muscle names, is not just try and memorize them straight out, but think about what the names mean and where you might find them, and that's going to make this section a lot easier. And so to help you with that, here's some different activities that help you think about what do these names mean, and these are some of the important ones that you're going to run into. And then also here's the same sorting activity that we just did with the papers, only this is an online version.